In today's video, I want to do something a little bit different. Since I've moved from Toronto to Calgary, I've actually had a few comments asking me what's a better place to actually resell in. Is it Toronto or is it Calgary? Now, I actually broke this list into 5 points that I wanted to go over from pros and cons from Calgary and also Toronto. And those points are garage sales, thrift stores, sourcing, shipping, and the last one's a miscellaneous topic, but it's pricing and culture. It sounds weird, but it'll make sense when I get to that point last. Let's start off with the very first one, which of course is garage sales. Garage sales are great. Now, there is some pros and cons for both, so let's talk about Calgary first. Calgary, the winters are longer, so that means garage sales season ends sooner and also starts later. Now, another thing that's good though about Calgary is the fact that there is a ton of community yard sales. I'm talking almost every single weekend during the summertime. So that makes it really good for a reseller to have a lot of variety. So you're not just like going from one house and then driving across the city to another yard sale that you find on either Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji. You actually have a ton to pick from in one particular area. Now let's compare that to Toronto. Toronto, the garage sale season does start earlier and it ends later as well. However, I find that there is less community yard sales in Toronto, so you have to actually plan your day out before you go out to your yard sale. You might be like, okay, there's one garage sale that I found here and there's another one over there, and what's the best kind of strategy to kind of go from one to the other, and then you kind of pick throughout the day which places you want to go to, and it can take a long time and a lot of gas money, and gas is very expensive now. Now I wanted to talk about pricing for these yard sales. I found that in Toronto you have some of the most insane good scores when it comes to yard sales. Some of the best ones we've had have been in Toronto, and we've been in Calgary pretty much all summer, and even though we've had some really good days in Calgary, nothing compares to the days that we've had in Toronto where we had massive scores. So I will say, when it comes to the garage sales in general, you do get better yard sales in Toronto versus Calgary, even though Calgary you have a lot more to choose from. Next up is thrift stores. Now, thrift stores it's a very interesting topic. There's a ton of thrift stores in Calgary, probably more per square mile than in Toronto. However, I will say Toronto, I find to have the better deals. Now, I found some crazy things at Toronto Value Villages, and they don't even have Goodwills in Toronto. You have to go to Mississauga to find a Goodwill. So just in the city, you're finding either Salvation Armies, Value Village, or just miscellaneous thrift stores and random ones like Stretch, which is one place that was close to my house in Toronto. And because of that, I have to say Toronto wins this one as well. You know, the thrift stores in Calgary are just absolutely brutal sometimes. I actually go sometimes with my wife just to kind of laugh and make fun of the prices. Some of the prices that they have on like their Pokemon cards, for example, or any sort of bag of Lego is absurd compared to Toronto Value Villages. So I'm gonna have to give this one to Toronto as well. Now, this one is a very interesting one because it's gonna be basically very broad. It's what I can actually pick. What is the picking like in Calgary versus Toronto? So I called this topic sourcing. Sourcing means where can I go to find things to resell? So Calgary has a very active Facebook Marketplace, which means there's a ton of things to actually pick through there. They also have a Goodwill bins, and Toronto does not have that. Toronto pretty much only has Valley Village thrift stores and garage sales during the summertime. So in the wintertime, it's horrible for Toronto because you're pretty much stuck going to thrift stores and maybe a random Facebook Marketplace deal here and there, versus Calgary, you still have the Goodwill bins, which is a massive, massive win over Toronto. So I have to say, when it comes to sourcing, Toronto loses this one, and I'm gonna have to go to Calgary for the winner. Next up is shipping. Now, shipping, you're gonna say, well, isn't shipping the exact same? You're in Canada. Well, you have to think of it like this. Expedited shipping, you do have variations in the shipping cost based on how many kilometers or how many miles you're actually going. So in Toronto, you have a bigger buyer's pool, not just within the GTA, but you're also on the East Coast. And the East Coast, the population is way more condensed than the West Coast. In fact, in Calgary, a lot of my buyers either come from British Columbia in Canada or they're in California, which is wild because in Toronto, I had a ton that were around the Ontario area. Then I shipped to a few places in Quebec a lot of the times because they also have a pretty big buyer's market in Quebec. Sometimes it'd be shipped to New York, sometimes it'd be shipped to Boston. So it's crazy the amount of variety within just a small area. So shipping, I have to say, Toronto is going to have to win this category because Calgary, you don't have as much buyers out there, unfortunately. Now, the last one is a bit of a tricky topic. This is more about the culture and pricing. Why did I call it culture and pricing? Well, what I mean is, as a reseller, where are you going to feel the biggest strengths? Where are you actually going to have the best rewards for being a reseller? Is it going to be in Toronto or is it going to be in Calgary? Now, this is a lot of it is going to be based on Facebook Marketplace because I do some selling locally on Marketplace as well as buying. And I have to say, when it comes to the culture, there are a lot more resellers in Calgary. In fact, every time I go to the thrift store, I'll see a few people on their phone using Google Lens, or they'll be scanning the UPC code on eBay to check on the particular price of an item. And in Toronto, you don't really see that as much. While there is definitely a lot of resellers in Toronto, I don't think you have quite as much based on the percentage of the population that lives in that city. In Calgary, it's a massive hustlers market. In fact, there is a ton of hustlers there. And I've had stuff stolen from Facebook Marketplace in Calgary, which is insane. I would leave it out in the mailbox and I would be home and they assumed I wasn't home and they stole it and they didn't leave the money in there. And that actually did happen to me in Calgary. And that's never happened to me in Toronto, which is kind of crazy because you'd think Toronto, you'd have more of that because the crime is apparently higher in Toronto than in Calgary. But there is a massive hustlers mentality in Calgary, and Facebook Marketplace, you can tell based on the prices and deals you see there versus Toronto. Some of the best, Lego deals that I've ever found on Marketplace are in Toronto, and the ones in Calgary, while I've had some decent ones, they're nowhere near as good as the ones I've found in Toronto. And while yes, you're still gonna find some scammers in Toronto, and you're still gonna find some prices that are outrageous in Toronto versus Calgary, for the most part, I say the large percentage of them are better in Toronto. So I'm gonna have to give this one to Toronto. Now, what does that mean for the score? We had 5, and it looks like Toronto has won 4 of them. So it's weird because I felt like I should be giving us to Calgary just because the Goodwill Bins on its own is like a massive win. And honestly, I still think the Goodwill Bins makes Calgary really close to Toronto because even though I had the point system, a lot of them, Calgary was just neck and neck with Toronto. So it's still almost a 50-50 here. I just think that Toronto has that slight edge over Calgary just because of mostly the thrift store pricing and the fact that it's just a bigger buyer's market. But I hope this video was useful to you. And if you also disagree with me, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to know your thoughts. And with that being said, I will see you in the next one. And remember, may your carts always be full.